So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Robert Fillmore from Workshare. I imagine not everybody around here may be familiar with us, but we are a content collaboration, document sharing and file synchronization provider, and also engaged in the enterprise social media space. What I'm going to talk to you today about is a couple of things. One thing here, the title says From Tablets to Tablet, and it's about the evolution of communications. So principally how we have evolved the different styles of communication from writing on stone tablets all the way through to having the nice little Android or iPad type of devices lurking around. So to kick off with, I'm just going to cover through the sort of agenda here in terms of key pieces about communications and the evolution of communication. What that means in terms of communications for marketeers, and finally, or a couple of things. One, to look at a case study with one of our customers who've been using the platform for a while, and also how you can take the power into your own hand to control your destiny in terms of the value of communications. Come on in, make yourselves at home. So, to kick off with, communications, what's it all about? And principally, every creature on the planet has some form of communications. We find communication really in a number of different types of format. The first one and most obvious from the picture of our lovely peacock here is the visual communications, the ability to create and emphasize ideas through just visual means alone. And in this case, a peacock trying very hard to attract a mate, one of the principal formats of communications. The next one we have is the forager bees, and the forager bees have a well-known and well-documented communication strategy of their communications dancing. So one of the forager bees will go out, find food, be able to identify that food source and communicate it back to the other members of its hive just through the ability to fly around and recreate through a particular set of movements the location of where that food source is. And then we move on to something a little bit more akin to human communication, and that is really around the ability for individuals to use verbal communications. We're saying verbal communications for the Vivet monkeys here. Obviously, all animals are communicating at some level. All animals are communicating at some level, either through feedback or other means. But the key pieces here is that it's not just about being able to use individual words, it's about using tonal expression, and that we find that creatures who are clearly not humans, but able to use different types of communication through different speech sounds, different screeches, to communicate different sounds. So that a Vivet monkey, for example, has something like about a dozen different communication sounds to identify different types of enemy that might be a danger or a threat to them. So how does that evolve into human communication, and where are we in terms of that relating to what we all do every day? Now, it's always difficult to know exactly when human speech developed, but it's pretty likely it didn't develop before there were humans. So as the research shows that the oldest records of human existence date back to about 200,000 years ago. Prior to that, there were the pre-human species, which I suspect probably had some kind of levels of communication. But in terms of vocal cords, really the animals which actually had a voice box that you can identify as humans date back to about 200,000 years ago. So the key emphasis there again for communication come down to hunting, fighting, food, and procreation of the key communications that were required. So speech really was a dominant way of communicating for a considerable period of human history until about 30,000 years ago. We have the first evidence of communication becoming something other than just vocal. And we get to a point now we see the first symbols appearing, in cave drawings. We get the first tablets being carved upon, and we get symbols being created. That's the first movement from speech being more than just a spoken thing. However, it doesn't really get to be much use until about 7,000 years ago, where it starts to evolve to become mobile. The first mobile communications are actually bits of papyrus and clay tablets that people have engraved things on, dating back 7,000 years. So we're finally getting to our first mobile communications, which is pretty much a long way from these things, but it's the first beginning of it. That began the ability to communicate and to transfer the ideas of communication from one group to another. My notes down here, I've got all sorts of interesting scientific things down here about what these things are, about 3 specific information communication revolutions after speech. So that says symbols and then writing, and then ultimately sort of wireless communication. But I'll come on to that as a later part of the presentation. So, we've spoken about the communications, the importance of communications. What does it mean to all of us? What's the importance of communications, and how can that give us a competitive advantage? So, straight away you think, Genghis Khan, what's he doing up there? What's he got to do with communications? And it's quite an extraordinary thing, is that the largest ever contiguous land empire on the planet was the Mughal Empire. And you can see how it stretches from just off the coast of the Japanese coastline all the way through to the far eastern parts of Europe and down south as far as India. So a huge, huge geography. And how on earth did this guy, before the advent of effective, easy communications, how did he manage to get his armies to be so effective at controlling such a large geography? And it comes down to the number of components we have up here. Speed. The ability to communicate quickly gives you a competitive advantage. Now, the thing that he did, Genghis Khan, he didn't really have the ability to have sent emails or text messages. But the next best thing was he had some very motivated dispatch riders. I'm using the term dispatch rider a little bit loosely because they didn't carry any dispatches. And I'll come on to that in a few moments around security and encryption. He basically had all of these guys spanning the empire, running breakneck speeds by horse to communicate from one side of the empire to the other. And they would run down what they called the YAM tracks, which are basically just the term for pathways that they had there. And they had these things called the YAM way stations. And basically, at a YAM way station, there'd be another horse, fresh. The rider would jump off that, jump on the next one, and carry on across the continent with the messages. The messages were security encrypted, as in they were memorized by the dispatch rider, and on pain of death, if he divulged it, his family would get horrible things happen to them, so that even if he was caught by the enemy, he would not divulge the messages. So you had highly encrypted communications, very secure type of communication system. So another key piece is, how do you manage, when you're dealing with a large group of individuals, how do you manage communications to a battlefield with maybe 100,000, 200,000 soldiers out there? And so he developed all of these things through use of battle horns, flag communications, etc. And from that use of all of these different communications styles, he was able to create a highly competitive ability to be able to outmaneuver all of his competitors and get a market dominant position. So it may not seem immediately obvious that Genghis Khan was a marketing kind of guy, but he was certainly out there getting market domination through the use of powerful communications. So what happens next? And this is the third stage of the communications that I was talking to you about. It's a pretty long way from the 13th century to the 18th century, so we have 500 years have happened since the demise of Genghis Khan, and we get to the next period of communications. And that period of communication starts off with semaphore. An evolution perhaps from the flags that Genghis Khan was using on the battlefield, but it certainly gets into a position of being able to communicate quickly and effectively without having to trash your horses, and arguably much faster than a horse rider can travel as long as you have line of sight. The big disadvantage, of course, is if it's a foggy day or it's nighttime, semaphores a bit tricky, so you can't really get that communication across. But very quickly we start seeing some evolutions happening, which obviously couldn't happen until you get to the invention of electricity. Electricity starts meaning we can send electrical signals, and we have the invention of the telegraph. Telegraph, fantastic, it seems like, at the time, instant communication. But of course it's not really, because I first of all have to get a piece of paper, I've got to write my message on it, I've then got to go to the telegraph office, give it to the telegraph operator, he types it all out. Somebody at the other end has to be there to pick it up and transcribe it, and somebody else has to take it to who I wanted to send it to. So pretty fast compared to a horse, not terribly fast compared to how we perceive things today. So quickly we move on through the invention of telephones, but who was the first guy to have bought a telephone? You think he's got to be buying something of a vision to think people are going to be communicating. So because who else can you phone if you're the first guy? A little bit of a gamble. But obviously the gamble paid off, as we're now all inundated with these kind of things. And then we start seeing other communications come through, and you actually see the rapidity or the frequency of development and evolution telescoping down very, very quickly, and getting to a point where we see almost every decade some new, very specific, epoch-changing communication starts coming into play. TV, fiber optics for very rapid communications. And even though it says on here SMTP email is 82, I was thinking, actually, I have to admit, I was around in 82 in the business environment, and we didn't really have email. You might have been able to send a text message on a computer screen from somebody on the same computer network as you were, but that was only in your own company. And it wasn't really until about 1995, I think, that I received my first ever email from somebody outside my company. And we think of email as being an established, developed, old technology. But really, intercompany email is only something that's been around for about 18, 19 years. So it's still a very new technology, although getting close to becoming an obsolete technology over the next few years. You've companies like Atos quite famously saying that they want to, or the CEO of Atos saying he wants to eliminate email communication internally in his business within 2 years, and that was from about 6 months ago. So he's on track to eliminate that. My own business, we're pretty much heading in that direction ourselves. We're using our internal enterprise social networks for the internal communication between our various departments and offices, as opposed to the development of email. And when it comes to email attachments, it's something I'm going to come on to with you in a few moments. So we see all this huge growth of activity coming up to the end of the 20th century, and then we come piling into only the first just over decade of the 21st century, and we see a huge growth in the adoption of technologies that weren't even considered at the end of last century. The whole thing here, most of this is all around the growth of things like web pages. I mean, you can say huge things like 2003, 3 billion web pages. You go, yeah, that's great now. Actually, there's a lot of people, we're probably in the like 30 billions, or it's considerably more than that now, because many people even have their own websites and their own web pages. So huge growth in those kind of things. Social networks have really driven that interaction, and not just driven the interaction between people on a consumer basis. People are bringing in these kind of ideas of how they use social networking tools, and how they're using file sharing tools that they use in their personal consumer lives, and they're bringing it into the business environment. So, huge growth in those kind of areas. But what does it all mean? What does it mean particularly into a marketing environment? Now I'm going to cover off a few ideas here, which go into some of the key things that we're having to face from a marketing perspective, is that we've got all this great development and growth in communications, but we're seeing a lot of changes in people's behavioral patterns as well. So we're seeing the growth of things like bring your own device. a year and a half ago, probably many of you wouldn't have known the term bring your own device. And looking at the blank faces, many of you don't know that term either. I'm just going to guess. Everybody know bring your own device? Wow, I'm amazed. Okay, bring your own device. Now, all of us have our own personal devices like this. Many of us now have tablets and iPads and the like. And the growth that we're seeing across enterprises, really globally, is the prevalence of people buying their own iPads or Android devices and bringing them into the office. And once they start doing that, it's really an expectation that they're saying, I want to be able to access my business tools, my business documents, and all of the information I normally use on a day-to-day basis. I want to be able to access that from any device. So that if I've got important client documents that I need to be able to present to a client and I'm going to be out of the office, I want to be able to do it from either my smartphone, my tablet, or my laptop, or even go onto a customer's computer and access it just through a web browser. So the concept of bring your own device is bringing the tools that you have familiarity with from Facebook, from using your Google Mail, from using LinkedIn, all of those kind of technologies, and bringing them into your business environment and your work environment. So what that actually then translates into is that if you have that happening, you've got people who now have access to your core marketing materials, your price lists, client confidential information, and how do you secure that? So one of the items we have down here is that sort of reducing risk, because we're seeing that, first of all, we've got a reducing cost and complexity item here. That is because by giving people the tools that allow them access to your corporate documents from multiple locations, potentially increases the risk, because it means that somebody might be able to access your top secret business proposal and give it to one of your competitors. So you need to be able to find ways of securely allowing people to use the devices that they're familiar with, but being able to do it in a way that I can control the way that you see a document. So instead of me sending an email to you and sending an attachment on that email, I can still send you an email, but I don't necessarily want you to open the attachment, edit it, change it, send me back the attachment, because then I'm going to have versioning controls. And particularly if you look at a use case where I might have a business proposal document I need to share with 20 different people, I attach that document, they all open it, they all review it, they all make corrections and changes and edits, and I all suddenly get back, I've got 20 versions of a document. What the hell do I do with that? And it's a nightmare. I can see a few nodding heads in the audience there. I've been there myself, where I've got a business proposal, needs to go out the next day, and at 2 in the morning I'm still collating changes and edits that people have made, and I've got to submit the document at 9 o'clock in the morning. So it's those kind of things that we want to be able to reduce the complexity of these things. And I'll come on to that in a few moments with my case study. But I want to reduce the complexity, I want to maintain security to make sure that people aren't distributing documents to people that they shouldn't be. This one, increasing productivity. I find it, again, going back to my earlier time when I first started my career, when we wanted to send something, when we wanted to talk to a customer, we might phone them up. The customer would say, yeah, send me something. So I'd have to handwrite a letter. I'd give it to a typist to type out. The typist would put it in an envelope. We'd send it off to the customer with a brochure. I'd then phone up 3 days later. Have you got my document? It was just an archaic thing. So we think about increasing productivity. At that point, we thought, how do you increase productivity? Email hadn't been invented. Now we've got all of these tools of being able to send things, and now even mega-sized files, gigabyte-sized files, we can easily send and share with people because of these productivity improvements. One of the other things is a lot of the documents that we work on with clients, particularly when we're dealing with their intellectual property, we need to make sure we conform to the compliance around those clients. So we need to be able to ensure that we can have full auditability, traceability, and show what we have done with those documents and prove security to the client. because at the end of the day, our reputations rely on our ability to deliver our clients secure information. So that gives us some of the items that we have to consider as marketeers. Going on to look at that process that I discussed a few moments ago in terms of the complexity of actually creating some content. So typically we might have a business process here where the marketing team comes up with a spec that they need to put together a new specification for a new car design that their client is releasing, a new press release or some kind of marketing materials. So they will typically start off designing something. They'll give the brief out to a design agency. They'll work with a copywriter. All of those guys need to interact with each other. Then it's got to go back to your legal guys, to the CMO, to come up with what's important to edit and change. So you've got all of these transactions happening to produce the documents. Then it goes out to the press release, great, or you go out to the field sales guys. Now, one of the key things is, and I've seen this happen in a number of companies, and maybe you guys have too, but one of the key things is we see sales guys would typically pick up their laptop, dash off, jump in front of a customer, open up some materials, and present the materials. Now, what happens if the materials that they have got updated last week and they haven't got the most recent stuff? Wouldn't it be great if the sales guy doesn't even have to think about this? He knows as soon as he opens up the laptop, it's got the latest up-to-date stuff automatically synchronized there because the marketing department centrally decided, new update of this material, here's the new stuff. And it's automatically published there for the sales guy out in the field to present to the clients. Another sort of content review process, and this just goes back to that example we talked about having multiple people using documents or editing and reviewing documents. And you can see the initial brief starts off, gets emailed to a few people as an attachment, they get a number of revisions back, it then goes out to some more guys, they have to review it, then goes through an approval, and it gets changed to a PDF, and it goes through all of these processes, finally until it gets signed off. So you've got all of these difficulties and challenges in terms of how do you present that data in a much easier, more efficient manner. And one of the key pieces here is this takes a lot of time. Even with all of the great technologies we have, being able to do emails and interchange with our email attachments, it still can take a considerable amount of time. And then you've also got the difficulty of what happens in terms of, are you sure you included each of the revisions? Is it easy to compare the different revisions? And all of those issues come into play. So these are the kind of areas that we need to address. So that takes me on to a client of ours in the marketing environment. Many of you may know Future Brand. They're part of the McCann, I was going to say McCann Erickson, but McCann World Group organization. They've got, I think, about 25 offices plus globally, so very much a global footprint as a brand agency. They've been using the product of ours for about a year or so, and they had a number of particular business requirements that they had. The first one was very simple: secure file transfer. Now, a lot of people will come into the idea of anybody here heard of Dropbox? Yeah, I think Dropbox is a great proposition because it's become pretty well known, and it reflects back to this idea I mentioned earlier of bring your own device. People start off using things like Dropbox because they want to share some pictures between the family, or they want to share some videos that they've taken between some friends. And what happens there is that because you get that familiarity with it, when you go into the office environment, you want to have the same kind of tools. Many businesses, in fact most businesses of a sort of a large enterprise stature, restrict that kind of service and completely ban the use of those kind of file sharing platforms because they're not secure. Data is stored in the USA, subject to USA Patriot Act, which means anybody or the CIA can come and grab the data. It also means that data doesn't have the same levels of password security, encryption and coding on it, so these things get blocked. So they had a problem about how do we securely transfer documents between us and our clients, and particularly what happens if it's a 2 or 3 gig file. How do I transfer that between different locations? And email, I can't use email to transfer these big files because my IT department blocks anything bigger than a 20 meg file, leaving as an attachment. So what they were looking at, how do I secure that? How do I get over that problem and be able to deliver files easily? And then it's not just about delivering the file, it's my customer's going to review it, they're going to edit it, they're going to make comments on it. And I've got big graphic images that the customer's going to make comments on. And I don't want to be comparing multiple versions. Or I've got large text documents where the customer's going to be making edits and changes. How do I ensure that all of those versions are managed effectively and I don't end up with multiple things? Actually, I better look a bit quicker because I realise I'm running out of time here. So the key things here are being able to provide secure file transfer and being able to have traceability. The other one is store and search, is that once I've actually got my documents, how quickly can I get hold of them again? So that I've got, as many of us have in our file systems on Explorer or Finder, if you're a Mac user, you've got hundreds and hundreds of documents. So it's how do I quickly get hold of the information that I need? So basically the situation, the solution they took is our file sharing and storage platform, which allowed them to easily identify the documents that were important to them and easily share by just typing in an email address that they wanted of the client they were sharing with. But you don't want to just type in any old email address, so we can actually build in policy controls to say documents which say private and confidential in the footer need to have this kind of security handling and may only be sent to a defined set of groups. For example, if you have something that says this document is for internal use only, it'll stop you sending the document or sharing the document with anybody who doesn't have an email address with your domain name in it. Or you can build those kind of capabilities into it. Moving swiftly on, because I know I'm a bit past time here, some of the key pieces that they were looking for, and most of our customers look for, is like being able to collaborate. So it's not just being able to view a document, but being able to work simultaneously, view documents and being edited in real time and make comments on them in real time, be able to deliver a document and know that somebody has received it, not just that they've received an email, but seeing that they have opened it. And if you can see they've opened the document, see what time they've opened the document for. Sending multiple size files, security, so you can have password security, and also make files availability expire by a particular date. I mentioned productivity, and I think productivity is one of the key pieces here, but I'll come on to that in a few moments in my sum up, because I realise I've only got half an hour and I'm already at 3:30. So, risk, incorporating the control mechanisms that I've already mentioned to you. So whizzing through, one of the key pieces is about extending the ability for your teams to be able to access the data that they need. Now, historically, and this represents a typical enterprise where you've got multiple departments within the corporate firewall able to access the corporate data. Fantastic. However, what happens if they leave the corporate environment? And this is typically happening, you see, where you've got consultants, salespeople, advisors, partners, all out and about wanting to access all of the data that you've got centrally behind this nice big firewall. What do you do about that? And then you've got additional people. It gets better. Yes, that's all right. We've got additional people here like partners, suppliers, customers who also need to get access to the data. So what we effectively do is by incorporating a secure cloud environment, all of your corporate assets and all of your corporate documents are accessible by effectively securely extending the firewall into a mobile environment. So the idea of bring your own device, so on your iPad, your Android device, whatever, you can securely access documents which are really important intellectual property of your own company. I see somebody taking top secret pictures of my documents here. This one very quickly says it's about the money as well, because how much money is being invested in terms of your marketing budget in the creation and distribution of content. This actually is showing on the left column the percentage of companies and how much they're spending in terms of marketing spend in content creation and distribution. Suffice to say, these are big numbers, so that in the one down there, it says the average spend for companies of over 1,000 employees is over £1 million dollars a year in spend on content creation and distribution. Even for small companies, it's still a very significant chunk of change. So the key synopsis of what we're delivering here is the ability to work anywhere, anytime, on any device. And that's really the transition that we're enabling, is that marketeers can be in any location, able to tap on their iPad, to be able to sit on their laptop and synchronize documents automatically across pretty much any of the people they're sharing those documents with. One of the key pieces I wanted to throw into this, and the importance of what we're doing here, is it's time to respond. How many of us have ever had a very important deadline? You've got to make sure your contract or your business proposal is in front of the customer by a specific date, and you're waiting on the finance department to respond to approve your financial proposition. You're waiting for the legal department to come back to you with their terms and conditions and acceptance, and you're waiting for the technical guys to approve the technical complexity of your solution, and you've got to deliver that tomorrow morning. And you haven't got all the data, but you're still going to make the deadline, and so you think, well, I'm going to have to go with the information I've got, and it puts you at risk of having to put a deal in front of a customer that doesn't have the right profit margin on it, or you may make a loss on it, or even worse, you might not be able to even submit your deal to the customer, and you miss out and your competition gets there ahead of you. So there's a lot of talk in terms of business investments around something they call ROI, return on investment. That if I'm going to spend X amount of money on a deal, how much is it going to save me? If you go back to the previous slide, when you're spending $1 million or $50,000 on content creation and distribution, you can actually say it saves you a proportion of that. But the most important thing is that the new technologies are doing, and what we're doing is we're improving not just your return on investment, but your risk of inaction. If you don't do these things, if you don't put these new kind of technologies in, your competitors will, and they will be one step ahead of you in being able to close the business, just like Genghis Khan had the communications technologies and was able to get there ahead of the game. So that's really my presentation. Just some credentials and a little quick bit of advertising. Workshare, many of you may not have heard of, but we are a well-established company. We've been around for 14 years. We have 18,000 customers globally. Many of these names are big brand names that you will be familiar with, have been using our products extensively for a significant amount of time. So we're a big, well-known, trusted name, and we welcome the opportunity for you to come and spend some time with us over the next, whatever's left of the show. And just some other accreditations. We get all of these nice awards, and as you can see, red herrings and the like of that, saying that we're good guys. And the final piece is, our mission is to create useful software that people love. What a fantastic mission.